Hello. Good morning, Minister. I want to thank you for being here and also thank everyone joining us online. Welcome to the 2020 annual meetings Governor Talks. As you know, today we are here with Minister Azucena Arbeleche. She took office on March 1st, 2020, a pretty good day to take office during these pandemic times, just 3 weeks before or 2 weeks before the world locked down to try to contain the spread of the virus. Mrs. Arbeleche has a degree in economics and a master's in economic policy, and she served previously for a long time in the Ministry of Finance of Uruguay, most notably as the head of the debt management unit, leading a huge transformation of debt policy in Uruguay. So with that, Azucena, welcome. Let's start, I think, from the obvious. Latin America has been severely hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And in this environment, Latin America has 30% of the world cases, maybe 30% of the deaths. And this environment, Uruguay stands out as a country that has been able to contain the spread of the pandemic, to have a very low mortality rate, and also, within the context of a world and a regional recession, to show macro numbers that also stand out in the region. So let's start from the epidemic, the pandemic, and tell us a little bit how Uruguay did to contain the pandemic, to be able to manage the pandemic from a public health aspect, and then we can switch to the economy.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you for the invitation to have the opportunity to talk with you and to share Uruguay's case and to hear about other experiences. Let me take this opportunity also to thank the fund for its role during this pandemic. It's a time of a lot of uncertainty, and the analysis that the fund always performs, the global outlooks are very important, but also the recommendations that under this uncertain world the fund has made, and also the way that the fund has moved very quickly into proposing different financial instruments to the countries. In our case, we haven't used the financial kits that the fund provides. We haven't needed to do that, but in many countries, I think that this has been essential. And financial stability is not all, but of course it helps to sail through this pandemic and to face the recovery that we all want to be there very, very soon. So thank you very much for the fund. Going to your question, Alejandro, as you said, this government took office on March 1st, and just 2 weeks after that, we heard that Uruguay had cases of COVID-19 in our country. So we had to immediately change our agenda, or at least for some time leave it on standby. We had been very critical about the fiscal position, the fiscal situation that Uruguay had. So our starting point was quite complex, with fiscal accounts and that were in bad shape, with a debt burden that was very high, and we were already going through a recession. So we had to leave that aside, and we had to communicate to our people that the focus now was to support everybody, especially those that are more vulnerable, so that they could sail through this pandemic. In that sense, we had to very early. We had to take the decision not to go on a general lockdown. Uruguay didn't go on a countrywide lockdown, so the decision was not easy, and it was made during the first days. And what the government did was rather ask its citizens to adhere to a voluntary freedom, to a voluntary stay at home, thinking that we appeal to individual freedom with responsibility. So it was more up to people if they went to work or not. Of course, our encouragement was to stay at home. And this was also accompanied by a series of measures. We closed the land borders. All air traffic was also closed, except for the repatriation flights, so that our citizens could come back to Uruguay. We suspended all public events. We suspended in-presence school classes. We limited the visits to nursing houses that were going to be a problem because, of course, this was the most vulnerable population. And we encourage, as I said, people to stay at home. So I think it was important the way that we communicated all of this to the people. As I've said, we were beginning the administration with the idea that we had to grow and to improve our fiscal accounts. And now we had to tell people we are going to care for everybody and we are going to support everybody through this pandemic. In that sense, it was important to approve in Parliament COVID-19 Solidarity Fund that we called, that on the one side, this fund earmarked all the resources that were going to be allocated in addressing the emergency. But on the other side, it had the objective of communicating people that all the resources needed for the pandemic, whether they're going to be social, economic, or sanitary resources, they were going to be there. So particularly you asked on the health measures, I would say that from the beginning, there was a very coordinated work amongst the ministries of health, foreign affairs and economy, so that from the first weekend, we were very much focused in buying abroad the ventilators that we thought that we were going to need during the pandemia, and we were worried about the preparation of ICU beds. Fortunately, we didn't have to use them, but we, at the beginning, this was a very big question, and we had to address that quickly. We made a lot of efforts in increasing the number of tests that were done every day. And here it was very important, the support from the Uruguayan scientific community, and up to the point that the scientific community created a national test procedure, and that has helped increasing the number of tests very much. And another point very important in terms of health procedures has been tracing. Once we have a positive case, the Ministry of Health traces all the contacts, people that could potentially have COVID-19, and they test for them. So I think that so far the results are good. Of course, there's no room for complacency in these situations, but I think that the good results respond to a very strong leadership from the president, a very strong communication from all government. We had, I would say, at the beginning, maybe every day we had a press conference showing what we're going to do and showing the cases or the issues where we had a lot of uncertainty. And also there has been a very good communication within members of government, the different ministries working together, but also the government with the private sector and the government with the scientific community.
I mean, looking at the results, it's so far pretty impressive, as you said, and it seems that, a pretty cohesive response by the population, given this voluntary lockdown implemented, suggested by the government together with these public health measures, focus very thoroughly on testing, tracing, and obviously supporting a health system that I think in relationship to the rest of Latin America was already in relatively better shape in a region that, I think we have, significant shortcomings in health, but obviously Uruguay stood out on that front even before the pandemic hit. So you mentioned at the beginning of your question, the initial conditions in which you receive the economy of a relatively high inflation, a very tight fiscal situation. So tell us a bit, what were your original plans in terms of moving forward towards establishing a very clear framework of fiscal sustainability, reduction of inflation, etc. And also, how do these plans change due to the pandemic, and at which stage are you currently in the implementation of this strategy?
So, Alejandro, I wouldn't say that the plans changed. So what we did was just leave the plans aside for some time, and the focus was into supporting all of our focus changed into supporting people, and especially the small and medium-sized enterprises to walk through the pandemia. We still have the medium-term agenda in place. But maybe before moving into that, I can share a little bit more of how we tackled the kind of measures that we took to support people and enterprises through the pandemia. As I've said, it was very important to give confidence to people that the support was going to be there. And that's why we created this COVID-19 fund. And this fund has allocated resources into different areas. On the social fronts, we have given direct subsidies to people so that people could have basic needs satisfied, people could afford to food, which could be a problem in these specific times of crisis. And as you said, that Uruguay has a good health system, and that's true. And we also have a very good safety net system. However, when we go through extraordinary situations like this, when we see that those systems are not enough and that still more has to be added. So in this case, we found out that it was the support that self-employed people had, even they were working on the formal system, there wasn't a good support for them when the activity came down. So we provided unemployment benefits for those people. We also provided a new scheme that allowed people to partially work and partially be under insurance unemployment. So that here it was very important not to keep the engines of the economy running. And that was a point that I personally made in one of these press conferences at the beginning of the sanitary crisis. We had this discussion. Do we have to go to lock down the economy? Do we have to keep the sectors working? And we decided that the engines of the economy should continue running. Of course, the speed was going to be a very low speed, and maybe we had to nearly stop. But the decision was not from the beginning, let's stop and let everybody be at home. So in that regard, we gave this incentive for workers so that they could, for some of the time, be working and some of the time be under this scheme of insurance, unemployment insurance. On the economic front, we deferred tax payments, we deferred contributions to the social security system, we subsidized some of these contributions to the social security system. We deferred loan payments, and this was done hand in hand with measures taken by the central bank. And I would say that the main instrument that we used during the crisis to help the small and medium-sized enterprises was to be very proactive, very generous on the disbursements or the loans, to give accessibility of loans guaranteed by states. So these state guaranteed loans that are around 5 points of GDP. Not all of that has been disbursed so far. So far, we have disbursed around 1 point of GDP, but it was important from the beginning to tell people we have all these loans available to be used, and they have the guarantee of state. We saw that this was in economic terms, this was clearly a liquidity crisis, and we didn't want this liquidity crisis to turn into an insolvency crisis. So it was important to put all this liquidity into working. So that related to the pandemic, but as you said, we also had to keep an eye on the medium term and the structural reforms. So in that regard, we had already been working on certain reforms that were part of a law that we presented in mid-April. So while we were in the beginning, while we were in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of April, just 1 month after we learned that we had the first cases of COVID-19, we sent to Parliament a fast-track draft of law that was finally published, approved in the middle of July. And together with that, we have been working with the budget law that was presented at the end of August. And right now we are in the middle of the discussion in the House of Representatives in these days. So both of these pieces of law, the urgent consideration law and the budget law, these help us move in terms of structural reforms in the coming months. So it was important all of the time to keep like these two things working at the same time. What is the immediate support to the pandemic, but also looking a little bit beyond that and tackling these issues that you were mentioning, not only on the fiscal front, but also on the monetary front.
Thanks, Azucena. One question that comes up in your description that maybe, some of our viewers would be interested. What was the size of this COVID response budget or COVID response trust? And what are your plans for next year? Given your projections for the economy, you think that you will be able to undo it fully or partially? So what are your thoughts regarding let's say, COVID support for households and firms in 2021, and give us a little bit of a rough idea of the size of this whole effort that was very comprehensive, as you described, and how it was distributed between households and firms.
So the COVID-19 Solidarity Fund, we estimate that for the whole year, it will amount to $800 million. And that is roughly 1.5 points of GDP for Uruguay. We are not coronavirus fund or COVID-19 fund, we are not considering the guarantees that we give in this loan. So that's something additionally, and that counts to 5 points of GDP. So this will have an impact in terms of fiscal result. We began this administration with a fiscal deficit of 5 points of GDP and a gross debt in terms of GDP of nearly 65% of GDP. And we think that this year the fiscal deficit will go up to 6.5% of GDP, partly because of this fiscal effect of the COVID-19, and also partly because we think that the economy will further decrease its activity, and that will have a consequence an impact in terms of less tax collection. After that, we plan to improve the fiscal accounts so that finally debt to GDP stabilizes. I think it's important that while we were thinking and moving forward with these different actions, at the same time, as I've said, in the urgent consideration law and in the budget law, we are presenting a new fiscal institutionality. So there are different points, one of which is the measurement of a structural balance. Up to now, Uruguay, which has very or quite deep business cycles, didn't have any structural balance by which to compare the results. Now we do have our objective, fiscal objective is in terms of a structural balance. We are trying to move forward in terms of having a countercyclical policy. We are also providing a ceiling in terms of the expenditure that the central government can make. And a third point is that we have a ceiling in terms of the indebtedness that the central government can have. So all of these points are part of a new fiscal institutionality that will help us gain credibility, that we have lost because the previous administration announced results that were not fulfilled in any of the years. So we have to move in that area that's why it was also important to have this fund. So at the end of the day, we can measure what if our expenditure has increased because of the COVID-19 or because we deployed the resources into something else.
Now that's, it's very interesting, especially, your whole agenda regarding creating a very strong institutional framework that oversees or guides fiscal policy to provide a very clear anchor in terms of your medium-term debt sustainability and fiscal sustainability. Let's turn a little bit at the structural changes that you think are needed for Uruguay to accelerate growth and to continue in this path of inclusive growth, but more accelerated growth, and where do you see the engines of growth in the next few years? What are the key structural issues that need to be unlocked, reforms that need to be implemented for this growth acceleration potential to happen?
So, Alejandro, I mentioned some of these reforms. The institutional reform for us is very important. There are also monetary reforms that are another part of this new institutionality, better communication, more transparency, and the objective of the central bank being lowering inflation and not having many objectives at the same time. We have made also, we are making progress in terms of a new governance for the public enterprises. At the end of the day, what we need are lower utility tariffs, that because that's part of the problem that we have in terms of competitivity for the country, and that is one of the main problems why the growth has been so poor. We also have presented the need to have a pension reform. We need to have to guarantee the pensions for our people for the next years, and we need also to guarantee the sustainability of these pensions. So there's also a fiscal side to this. We are being much more proactive in terms of trade policy. We need more results. We need to have Uruguayans' goods to access market on more beneficial beneficial aspects. And but equally important is not only to have these reforms in that we are pushing in our laws, but is to promote investment, because if we want to grow and if we want to have more employment, what we need is more investment. And investment, particularly private investment, has been lacking behind in Uruguay for many years now. So in that sense, one of the main drivers will be in the private investment, and we have been very active in changing the investment promotion regime that Uruguay has so far. We have published a new regime for housing for the more vulnerable sectors. We have published a new regime for big ticket construction. And just some days ago, we published a new regime where we extend the benefits of fiscal benefits for the projects, for investment projects, and we extend also the kind of sectors that can be included in this tax incentives. We have also presented changes in the tax residence. We want to further gain families, to have families and foreign investment coming into Uruguay. Our rules of the games are very clear. That is an asset that we have had for many years. So we think that it's important to show this and to make it to have a more friendly entry for families and investment into our country.
No, it's again, a pretty impressive agenda, and as you said, the combination of a strong fiscal framework, a pension reform, more certainty on the monetary policy side, and the clear objective of having low and stable inflation, together with all these sectoral issues on the public enterprise and a stimulus for investment. I mean, it seems like a pretty aggressive and complex issue also to deal with Congress, and it's an impressive and very full agenda. Let's maybe finish with the environment. Uruguay performs extremely well on environment, social, and governance fundamentals. And obviously, given the global concern regarding climate change and the impact of that climate change will have on the environment, on our cities, on our ways of living, tell us a little bit more about what's Uruguay's strategy on this dimension.
Yes, first of all, as you mentioned, Alejandro, Uruguay historically has a very good position in terms of the fundamentals, in terms of environment, social, and governance. That is not new for our country. Some days ago, Fitch published its report where it kept the investment grade status for Uruguay, and all of these factors were mentioned, and they are very important. And I would say that Uruguay stands very good in terms of democracy, in terms of human rights, and in terms of freedom, not only in the region, but also on an international comparison. Let us remember that Uruguay is one of the 22 countries with full democracy, according to the Economist Index. So in that regard, the environmental is very important for us. And finally, we have in this urgent consideration law, we created the Ministry of Environment, which I would say will have on one side a very economic approach in terms of the punishment and incentives in the way that people treat the environment. And on the other side, the objective will be to safeguard the natural resources that we have. Uruguay is a country with beautiful beaches, land, rivers, all of which are a national pride for all of us Uruguayans, and we are all committed to preserve these natural resources. The brand Uruguay Natural has been the way how Uruguay has presented itself to the world in the last years, and and that shows the way that the importance that we give to these natural resources. We are very lucky to have them. It is our responsibility to care for them so that the next generations can have the benefit of using also these resources.
No, I think we've covered, a lot of topics. Maybe, Azucena, you would like to give our viewers what's your outlook for the Uruguayan economy in 20 and 21? And although you've already described it, maybe summarize and let's finish with what you consider the main medium-term challenges for your country.
It's nicer to comment on 2021 than 2020 in terms of outlook. For 2020, we expect a decline of GDP of 3.5%. This is not bad if we compare what is the case for other countries in the world, but of course it's not good. The good side of this is that after a very hard second quarter, where the GDP fell nearly 11% on an interannual basis, we are right now seeing quite a lot of indicators that we are beginning to face the recovery, so that we will be going through this V-shape in terms of activity. That is the case with the indicator of car sales, the tax collection, and I would say the demand for fuel also shows that we are under this recovery. For next year, we project a rebound of the economy of 4.3%. And for the years after that, the economy will be growing around 3%. Of course, much of these numbers depend on the impact that the structural reforms that we are pushing forward have. In terms of the challenges ahead, I think that I mentioned some of them during this talk. I would add to those challenges those that are related to research and innovation, because one of the things that we have learned during this crisis in Uruguay is that we can have a very good outcome when research and government work together. And in that sense, we are planning and we have the challenge to be much more innovative in terms of having better education, better technical centers, and pushing in private investment into this area. So we can make a difference in terms of innovation and technology, being a small country. But I think that this is an area where we have a good opportunity. And I think that the work, the very collaborative work with the academia, in this case with the scientific academia in Uruguay, and being pushing the topics to the edge in many areas, I think has shown us that we do have an opportunity in that sense. Maybe the last point that for us it's a challenge, an important challenge, is related to gender equality. And in that sense, the approach that we have in Uruguay is very practical. And what we are moving, the way we are pushing is moving resources into very concrete results. So we need to have resources allocated so that we don't have, so we support women that face violence in their homes and so on. It's not only the discussion that's important, but concrete support so that we make progress in this area. So I would say that the challenges are not new. What we are committed into giving our people, or our Uruguayans, or all the people that live in our country, a better quality of life. And in that sense, what we need is people to have more freedom so that they can choose by themselves the project of life that they want to have. And in that way, we are all contributing to have a more cohesive and more diversified society.
Minister, thank you very much for your time and for this very clear and enlightening discussion on the current state, but more so on the future and the plans that you and President Lacalle Pou have for your country. I also want to thank everyone for joining us at these virtual governor talks of the 2020 annual meetings. Again, thank you very much.